Human nature. Is it good or bad? A question that has been asked time and again. A question that is more important than any other question you might ask yourself along the course of your life. Who am I as a being? Why am I like this? Where did I come from? Where am I going?
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. What is love?
Man commits all sorts of atrocities, from the horrific treatment of their fellow human to breeding decorative dogs to make their purses look more interesting. But every once in a while, they'll go and do something kinda nice, and it might make you wonder, are we naturally good or naturally evil? And although there are so many interesting perspectives on the subject of human nature, I want to approach this question by taking a look at a classic, the Abrahamic tradition story of the fall of man. According to this, Adam and Eve, the first ever created people, existed in a state of innocence and purity in a place known to us as paradise. They were in adherence with the divine will of God. Now, it is important to note that God is not simply a man in the sky making things happen, but God can also be synonymous with truth or reality or love. But once they succumbed to the desires of the ego and the forbidden fruit was plucked, they had retaliated from the truth and closed their eyes to the divine reality. They had chosen the desires of the ego, the desire of a fruit, a material thing, which removed them from the pure state that they were in and caused them to fall from paradise to the material world. From light to dark, from knowing to not knowing, from true love to the love of that which feeds the ego. From this, we can deduce that man has an inclination towards that which is evil, a tendency to be enticed by that which is forbidden. Even though they were pure, they were able to be tempted towards impurity. Perhaps this also lends a hint as to why it all happened the way it did. What I find most interesting about this perspective is that it recognizes the duality within man, who is capable of abiding by divine principles which can bring them closer to the reality and the truth of things and themselves, which is represented by them previously existing in the objective reality that is paradise. It also shows that fallen man's purpose is to return to his true self, his original state, to be good once again. Like how a baby is born innocent and begins to sin as they make their way further into adulthood. To do this, one must not rebel against the divine decree because that will simply lead us further and further into the material reality and further into the falsity created by the ego. The toxicity and problems of the ego are not only recognized in Abrahamic traditions. Carl Jung, a famous 20th century author and psychiatrist, believed that the ego and all its attachment to the material state is what causes pain and disillusion. As one follows the desires of the ego, status, money, power, influence, they will always be uneasy, unfulfilled, and subject to the constant struggle to have one's way. Living through the ego is characterized by very high highs and extremely low lows. It tends towards extremities, which is usually never where the truth is. One will also never be able to know their soul until ego death is reached. Soul can be synonymous with one's true self, untainted by societal standards and cultural expectations. Many Christian and Muslim theologians believe that soul is a piece of divine source itself. It is important to note that different theologians and religious clergy have different terminology for essentially the same concept. For some, this is the spirit, other times referred to simply as the heart, and according to Bishop Callistos Ware, the virgin point. He quotes a passage written by Thomas Merton, whereby the virgin point is described. At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our disposal, from which God disposes of our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our own mind and the brutalities of our own will. It is this part of divinity within the human being where God's unconditional love can be found. In the New Testament, it is stated outright that God is love. And if we look behind the curtain drawn by the ego, past the distractions of the illusory fleeting existence of this life, there lies a truth within us, and a love found through union with the Creator which is strong enough to allow a person to be herself. It is the Holy Spirit itself in Christianity which ignites divine love in the heart. According to the New Testament, it is only God who is capable of true love. It is different from the secular, self-pleasing love of the ego. For many Christians today, divine love is what Jesus exemplified in his sacrifice at the cross, sacrificing himself to atone for the sins of man. So in Jesus' example, Christians are urged to wear a compassionate heart when dealing with others, to live through their souls and allow the Holy Spirit to shine through them with its unconditional love. It is this unconditional love that saves us from the anguish of a hell-like state, which is subject to change in this life, but ultimately solidified in the next. A state one can witness in anybody who lives in disregard to morality and ethics, considered in the most universal sense of the word. It allows one to approach all of creation with acceptance and love, and when the ego is dissolved, man and the Creator can become one. It is important to recognize that even though injustices can reasonably be met with justice, forgiveness is better for the well-being of the individual, as it is coming from God within us and allows for true relinquishment of inner strife. Besides, when we are no longer rooting for ourselves and approach things through a kind of divine objectivity, things stop being so personal. We can understand the reasons for people's actions and the significance of a difficult hurdle, and it becomes easier to give even the most tyrannical and horrible people a bit of grace and understanding. Making peace with others undoubtedly makes one's mind and overall life experience more peaceful. But another key effect that unconditional love has is allowing a person to be at peace with themselves. Anxiety and depression are some of the most common mental ailments that affect the human population. It is arguable that such conditions are linked to believing in extremities and not having a firm grip on reality. Statements like, "I don't deserve to live," "I am worthless," "I can't do anything," are typical of, but not limited to, such a mental state, and are inherently false and uselessly extreme perspectives to have of oneself. As a human being, our measurements of one's worth are attached to very subjective standards. We cannot, in all our humanness, definitively determine who is objectively worth more simply because we do not have access to all the information about any individual to determine this. Regardless of this, however, around 4% of people in the world suffer from depression or an anxiety disorder. And honestly, it's likely much higher, considering how mental disorders are still often undiagnosed and ignored in many parts of the world. Now, most modern psychologists usually begin to question a patient about their life experiences in order to identify what's causing their condition. A very important line of questioning is usually dedicated to their relationships. Overly critical parents, manipulative partners, narcissistic friends. Other people have a deep impact on the individual, and others' inability to love unconditionally is often why people feel inadequate, especially parental figures. It is clear that we need and crave love. What makes matters worse is the expectations people have around love. Due especially to Hollywood and mass media, the image of what love is and how it is expressed is shaped in an extremely specific and arguably unrealistic way. And when we do not see that in our lives, we assume that it must not be there at all. So many of us feel this lack of love and allow it to destroy our inner world and wreak havoc with our sense of peace because we feel less than when we are treated by others as less than. So what can be done when you clearly need to feel loved in order to have a sense of peace with yourself, all the while you cannot rely on other people to love you unconditionally simply because they are not capable of that? And the truth is, they don't need to be. Islamic belief states that which is deserving of love should be loved, and that which is not deserving of love should not be loved. For example, one's love for God should be most, as God is most deserving of it. Liars should not be loved, murderers even less so. Even God has love for those who do good and does not love those who do evil. So human beings must also be loved proportionally. This ultimately shows that people for the most part are not owed unconditional love by their fellow man. In fact, loving somebody without any conditions is actually dangerous. People, as explained previously, are not always good and can abuse others who don't set up realistic boundaries. To not set up conditions in order to love another person can potentially lead one to ruin. Conditions are as simple as being kind to others or responsible or has a moral compass. You might be thinking now of all the love you have for others and the endless unconditionalness of it all. Truth is, our love for others can be very strong, but not quite unconditional. Think of parental love and how one's love for their child is often the most abundantly they have ever loved someone. Yet, there is still an undoubtable give and take. Even the most devoted parents' love will waver if one child takes the life of their other child. For some, it can waver for much less. So then the question remains, where do we get this love that we so desperately need to feel regulated and sane? It is stated in the New Testament that only God is capable of true love, and similarly in the Quran, there is a reiteration of God's rahmah on man, regardless of what he does or who he is. Rahmah is different from hub, mentioned previously, in that the former is mercy, which God has on everybody, and the latter is love, which is bestowed on only those who do good, and will be extended to those who return to good again. It is divine love and mercy which is always present for us, available to us within our own selves if we choose to seek it. Its presence in our life is a confirmation of our inherent worth as an individual, and it is the antidote for the mental strife of living in the dunya, giving a person strength, objectivity, confidence, and most importantly, peace. So, because true, constant, unconditional love can only come from the divine, we must make our way back to that in order to liberate ourselves from a loveless hell, both in this life and in the next. Man in a fallen state is implied to be living in a world with a choice that leads either to heaven or hell, which is facilitated through choosing good or evil, love or hate. After exploring this explanation of human nature, we can deduce that all evil is done due to ignoring the divine love and mercy in one's heart. This would mean that evil is not just punished with hell. Hell and its punishments are a symptom of evil, like the fiery rage felt by one's own hatred, or sleepless torment after wronging another, or the anxiety felt when deluding oneself with egocentric lies. Hell is a fruit growing on a tree with its roots deep in the soil. But the way back to good is on the path back to one's own heart, where divine love is waiting to liberate us from the hell of our egotistical desires and this material reality.